The night was thick with anticipation. The Plaza Hotel, draped in grandeur, stood like a fortress of power and wealth, its golden chandeliers reflecting off the marble floors as New York's elite gathered for an evening of opulence, influence, and political theater. The event had been carefully curated, a charity gala doubling as an unspoken battlefield, where alliances were forged and broken with a single handshake, a raised glass, or a well-placed whisper. At the center of it all, Donald J. Trump arrived, in signature style. The moment he stepped through the grand double doors, the energy in the room shifted. Love him or hate him, he commanded attention. Heads turned instinctively, conversations momentarily faltered, and camera flashes flickered, like tiny bursts of lightning. He was dressed impeccably, his navy suit sharp, his red tie bold, his unmistakable presence filling every inch of the space around him. He walked with his usual air of self-assurance, exuding the confidence of a man who had spent a lifetime turning adversaries into footnotes and doubters into spectators. His entrance alone was enough to spark murmurs across the ballroom. Some people whispered in admiration, others in barely concealed disdain, but all acknowledged his undeniable presence. He moved toward his table at the front of the room, where a collection of high-profile guests awaited, their expressions ranging from eager to cautious. As he took his seat, a waiter immediately appeared with his preferred Diet Coke, the silver tray glinting under the cascading lights. Across the room, another figure was preparing to speak, unaware that his entire world was about to crumble. Senator Richard Calloway had built his career on a delicate balance. Once an ardent Trump supporter, he had subtly distanced himself in recent years, carefully towing the line between loyalty and self-preservation. He had remained close enough to Trump's base to maintain their support, yet far enough from his controversies to appease more moderate voters. It was a balancing act many politicians attempted, but few mastered. Calloway believed he had played it perfectly. Tonight was supposed to be a moment of triumph for him. As he stepped onto the stage, he adjusted his tie and flashed a rehearsed smile, the kind designed to exude confidence. The applause was polite but lacked enthusiasm. He didn't notice. He was too wrapped up in the moment, too focused on the speech he had meticulously prepared, designed to straddle both loyalty and independence in a way that kept his future ambitions alive. He took a deep breath and began speaking, his voice even and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to stand before you tonight." Then it happened. A sharp burst of sound interrupted him, the unmistakable noise of a video playing over the speakers. The massive screen behind him, which had moments ago displayed nothing but the event's elegant branding, flickered to life. At first, the image was unclear, distorted like a signal struggling to find clarity. Then, suddenly, there it was. His own face, his own voice. A private conversation, leaked for all to hear. Trump? He was a means to an end. We used him. He used us. The man is a circus act, and we let him run the show. Silence gripped the ballroom like a vice. It was the kind of stillness that only came before disaster, the kind that stretched infinitely in the mind of the one suffering. The weight of those words, spoken in what he had believed was the safety of closed doors, now echoed in the most public, most damning way possible. The room was no longer his. The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps rippled through the crowd, champagne glasses froze mid-air, eyes darted between Calloway and Trump. Some looked shocked, others amused, but all were captivated. Calloway's face, previously a mask of controlled charm, drained of color. He blinked rapidly, his mind scrambling for a way out, a way to contain the damage that was already seeping into every corner of his political future. He tried to speak, but his voice faltered. He coughed, forced a chuckle that came out more like a desperate wheeze. Now, let's not." The murmurs grew louder. Some people openly chuckled, others exchanged knowing glances. He was drowning in the very room he had walked into expecting admiration. And then, the moment that no one saw coming, Donald Trump moved. He didn't just sit back and let the humiliation unfold. He didn't smirk from his table or revel in the downfall of a man who had so clearly betrayed him. Instead, with a slow, deliberate motion, he stood. A hush fell over the crowd. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the servers, who had spent the evening weaving through tables with practiced efficiency, paused as they sensed the shift in energy. Trump buttoned his jacket, his expression unreadable. He began to walk, each step unhurried but deliberate, cutting through the heavy silence like a blade. The sound of his polished shoes against the marble floor seemed deafening. Calloway, still stranded on the stage, stiffened as he realized what was happening. Trump reached the base of the platform and, without breaking stride, ascended the steps. Calloway's breathing became shallow, his eyes darting between the screen, which had mercifully gone dark, and the man now standing before him. Trump extended his hand. Not in a fist, not to push him aside, but in an unexpected gesture. A handshake, a lifeline. The room collectively held its breath. Calloway hesitated, his instincts at war. Was this a trap? A public display of dominance disguised as grace? Or was it something else entirely? His hand, still clammy with nervous sweat, met Trump's in a firm grasp. The former president pulled him in slightly, leaning in just enough to speak in a voice only Calloway could hear. "Smile," Trump muttered, "and follow my lead." What happened next would leave the entire room speechless. For a moment, the entire ballroom stood frozen in a kind of suspended disbelief. Richard Calloway, humiliated, exposed, and on the verge of political ruin, could only stare into the unreadable gaze of Donald Trump. The handshake was firm, but there was something else. Beneath it, a hidden power play, a shift in the dynamic that no one had predicted. The murmurs in the crowd swelled and then quieted again. Everyone watching, waiting. Trump, still gripping Calloway's hand, turned toward the audience. With the same slow, deliberate motion, he reached for the microphone. His expression was neither one of anger nor triumph, but something far more enigmatic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice cutting through the thick tension like a razor. "I have to say, this is really something, isn't it?" A nervous chuckle rippled through the room, uncertain, hesitant. Some in the audience looked to each other for guidance. Was this going to be another one of Trump's legendary public takedowns? A dismantling of an opponent before the eyes of the world? Calloway himself remained stiff, caught in the moment, awaiting his fate like a man on trial before an unpredictable judge. Trump tilted his head slightly as if considering the situation from a new angle. Then, with a sudden shift in energy, he let out a booming laugh. A real belly-deep laugh, one that echoed off the gilded walls of the ballroom. The sound took the audience by surprise, and in the strangeness of the moment, a few people hesitantly laughed along, though they weren't entirely sure why. "Richard," Trump continued, slapping the senator on the shoulder in a way that was both jovial and commanding, "I gotta tell you, that was some pretty good stuff. Really, folks. Very funny, right?" He turned back to the audience, his signature smirk curling at the corner of his mouth. "I mean, let's be honest. These politicians, they say things behind closed doors. They all do it. You should hear what some of these guys have said about me." He gestured vaguely toward the crowd, where more than a few senators and business moguls suddenly found their gazes fixed on their drinks. But you know what? That's politics. The shift was subtle but seismic. In one move, Trump had seized control of the narrative, taken the humiliation meant for Calloway, and spun it into something else entirely. The crowd, sensing the change in tone, began to adjust. Shoulders relaxed, the tension in the air dissipating just slightly, like the release of a taut rope. Trump turned back to Calloway, his expression now one of feigned magnanimity. Richie, he said, shaking his head in mock disappointment. "You thought you could get away with that? Come on, you're better than that. Calloway, still pale, managed a weak smile. It was the smile of a man who had been thrown overboard and was now being tossed a lifeline, but one with a hook in it. Trump wasn't done. You know what? He continued, pacing the stage now, his hand still gripping the microphone like a weapon. This reminds me of something. You remember The Apprentice? Great show, great show. Biggest thing on TV, everyone loved it. You remember what happened when someone got caught lying, right? The audience chuckled again, this time more genuinely. They knew where this was going. Calloway swallowed hard. He could feel the noose tightening. But I'll tell you something, folks, Trump said, his tone shifting once more, this time with an air of unexpected benevolence. I believe in second chances. Some people wouldn't. Some people would say, Calloway, you're done, career over. Pack it up, go home, sell insurance. He waved a dismissive hand. And maybe that's what should happen. Maybe that's what you deserve. He let the words hang in the air, letting the weight of them settle. Then, just as quickly, he turned. Back to Calloway, and with a grin that was equal parts magnanimous and menacing, he said, But I'm feeling generous tonight. What do you say, folks? Should we let Richie here redeem himself? The audience, still processing the spectacle before them, hesitated. A few claps, some scattered laughter. Trump raised an eyebrow. Come on, let's hear it, he bellowed, throwing one arm up in the air. The room, now fully under his control, erupted into cheers and applause. Calloway, still standing there, looked out at the crowd, his breath shallow. He had no choice. He had been pulled back from the brink, but he was now firmly in Trump's grip, his future in the hands of the man he had privately mocked. Trump turned to him, lowering the microphone slightly. Richie, why don't you tell the people what you really think? It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. Calloway licked his lips, his mouth suddenly dry. He had spent years crafting speeches, maneuvering carefully through the world of politics. But this was different. This was survival. He took a breath. The moment stretched. And then he spoke. A hush fell over the grand ballroom, an unbearable tension thickening the air as all eyes bore down on Richard Calloway. He could feel his heartbeat hammering against his ribs, his mouth dry as sandpaper. The weight of the moment pressed against his shoulders, crushing him beneath its invisible force. He had been backed into a corner, given an opportunity that wasn't truly an opportunity at all. This was a test, a public trial in which the jury had already been swayed, and the judge, standing before him with a signature smirk, held all the power. Calloway cleared his throat, reaching for the last shreds of composure he had left. He could feel the sweat pooling at the back of his neck, his once immaculate tuxedo suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. The microphone, cool and metallic in his grip, might as well have been a loaded gun. He swallowed hard, then forced a thin smile as he brought the mic to his lips. Well, Mr. President, he stopped himself, then corrected. I mean, President Trump, I have to say that video was, quite something. His attempt at humor fell flat, the silence in the room, suffocating. Trump tilted his head slightly, waiting, his expression unreadable. The crowd, still in a state of collective amusement, leaned in, sensing the spectacle was far from over. Calloway had two options. He could fight, try to defend himself, spin the narrative in some miraculous way that would salvage his dignity but surely doom his political career. Or he could bend, swallow his pride, and survive the night. He chose the latter. Listen, he said, exhaling deeply. I made a mistake, a big one. I said things I shouldn't have said, things that were taken out of context. He forced a weak chuckle, the sound of a man desperately trying to resuscitate his credibility. The truth is, I have nothing but respect for President Trump. He hesitated, forcing himself to continue. He is one of the greatest leaders this country has ever seen. Trump raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening just slightly. And you know, Calloway pressed on, gripping onto whatever fragile rope of redemption he could find. If there's one thing I've learned from him, it's that a man should own up to his mistakes. He turned toward Trump now, his forced humility on full display. "Mr. President, I owe you an apology." There it was, the submission. The crowd murmured, some nodding approvingly, others exchanging knowing glances. They understood what had just happened. Calloway had been publicly humbled, dragged to the brink of disgrace, and then offered a lifeline, one he had been forced to take with both hands. Trump let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. He stepped closer to Calloway, the aura of dominance undeniable. Then, after a long pause, he finally spoke. Apology accepted. The room erupted into applause. Some laughed. Others clapped as if witnessing a grand theatrical performance. Trump, ever the showman, turned toward the audience, extending his arms like a maestro commanding an orchestra. "See, folks," he boomed, "that's what we like. We like people who can admit when they're wrong. That's a rare thing these days. That's a good thing." He turned back to Calloway, slapping him on the shoulder with just a little too much force. "You're learning, Richie. You're learning." Calloway could only nod, his forced smile frozen in place. Inside, he felt hollow. Trump turned back toward the crowd, his energy shifting once again. "Now let's get back to the real reason we're here tonight," he declared, effortlessly transitioning as if the entire public execution of Richard Calloway had been nothing more than a passing amusement. "We've got a great cause, folks, a tremendous cause." And just like that, it was over. The moment had passed, and the night moved on, the humiliation neatly wrapped up, packaged and set aside. People turned back to their conversations, their drinks, their business deals. The powerful played their games, and Calloway, now firmly put in his place, had been taught a lesson he would never forget. He remained on stage for a moment longer, his face carefully composed. Then, without another word, he turned and walked off, his steps slow, deliberate, measured. And as he left, he could still hear Trump's voice ringing out, commanding the room, controlling the narrative, just as he always did. But something in Calloway had changed, something he would never be able to bury. The gala moved forward as if nothing had happened. Waiters glided between tables, refilling half-empty glasses of champagne, the low hum of conversation resuming in the air. The rich and powerful, always eager to latch on to the next spectacle, had already begun discussing other things: stocks, elections, scandals more pressing than Richard Calloway's very public undoing. But for Calloway, the world had stopped. He stepped off the stage, his polished shoes tapping against the marble floor, each sound echoing in his ears like a drumbeat of defeat. His face still carried the ghost of a smile, a careful mask to prevent anyone from seeing the turmoil raging inside him. He could feel eyes on him, some sympathetic, some indifferent, others reveling in his humiliation. He forced himself to keep walking, his spine rigid, his movements precise. Inside, though, his mind was unraveling. How had this happened? He had spent years building himself into something formidable, balancing the ever-shifting tides of political loyalty and personal ambition. He had calculated every move, played every angle. And yet all it had taken was one leaked recording, one viral betrayal, to rip it all away from him in the span of a few minutes. And worse, he had surrendered. He had stood on that stage and bent. The knee, allowed himself to be paraded like a fool, permitted Trump to decide his fate like an emperor toying with a defeated gladiator. The words still burned in his throat. Trump is one of the greatest leaders this country has ever seen. He had said it, forced it out, publicly, for the world to hear. And now, it was part of his story. A waiter passed by, offering him a drink. He waved it off. His stomach was a battlefield of nausea and suppressed rage. He needed to leave. He needed to escape the suffocating air of that room, to get away from the golden glow of the chandeliers, the knowing glances, the hushed whispers of men and women who had already dismissed him as a cautionary tale. He maneuvered through the crowd, making his way toward the exit, each step feeling heavier than the last. Then, just as his hand reached for the sleek gold handle of the double doors, he heard the voice. "Hey, Richie!" He closed his eyes for the briefest of moments before turning around. Trump was there, just a few steps away, his grin wide, his posture relaxed. To the casual observer, it might have seemed like a friendly exchange, a warm moment between two political allies. But Calloway knew better. He knew exactly what this was. He forced himself to return the smile. "Mr. President," Trump stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough so that only Calloway could hear. "Hell of a night, huh?" Calloway chuckled weakly. "Yeah, one for the books." Trump clapped a hand on his shoulder, firm, controlling, final. "You handled it well. Could have gone another way, you know. A real nasty way." His grip tightened just slightly before releasing. "But you made the right choice." Calloway felt something cold slither down his spine. "You're a smart guy, Richie," Trump continued, his tone conversational, almost jovial. "You know the game, and you played along. That's why you're still here." He gestured to the room behind him. "You're still in the club. That's what matters, right?" Calloway nodded automatically. "Right. Good," Trump said, slapping him on the back again. "Now go enjoy yourself. Have a drink, shake some hands. Let 'em see you smiling. We don't want people thinking you lost tonight, do we?" The words were both a command and a warning. Calloway hesitated, 1,000 thoughts flashing through his mind. He could walk out that door, leave the gala, disappear into the night, and let his career sink beneath the weight of his own cowardice. Or he could stay, wear the mask, play the part that had been assigned to him. He took a breath. Then, with a practiced ease, he forced the corners of his mouth upward. "Of course not." Trump grinned. "That's my guy." And just like that, he turned and walked away, already engaging someone else, already moving on to the next piece of the night's entertainment. Calloway stood there for a moment longer, the weight of the evening pressing against his chest. Then, slowly he straightened his tie, adjusted his cuffs, and turned back toward the crowd. The night wasn't over. He wasn't over. Not yet.